In this video, we're going to be replacing the power steering pump in this 2005 Honda Element. So we're going to get our serpentine belt tool on our belt tensioner. We're going to loosen the tension on the belt. And remove the belt from the power steering pump. And ideally what you want to do here is take your belt off, keeping upward tension on the belt so it doesn't come off of the other pulleys. All right, so we're going to have to just spin this inside our serp tool here and release tension on the serpentine tool. And we can go ahead and remove our serpentine tool while holding our belt up. And then what we're going to do here is grab a zip tie and tie our serpentine belt to something up in this general area just to hold it up and somewhat tight. All right, so while I grab a zip tie, I'm going to take the handle of my serpentine tool, put it through the belt, just to keep it from falling down. All right, now I'll grab a zip tie and tie our belt up. Now you probably will need a larger zip tie, depending on where you want to tie it. But I'm going to go to my AC line. That way it's off to the side and out of the way as much as possible. There we go. Now if we follow our power steering pressure line to our power steering pump, you'll see where it connects up top. We're going to have a 10 millimeter in the back and an 8 millimeter in front. Before you start this process, even though we've done the back, there still will be residual fluid on this side of the hose. You do not want to get that fluid on your belt or in your pulleys. So what we're going to do is set ourselves up with some kind of spill protection. In this case we have an absorbent pad. So we're going to protect the pulleys and the hose the best we can. Alright, so now that we have pretty much everything protected that we need to protect, we can go ahead and remove our line. We're going to start with the 10 millimeter on the back. Now I'll move to the 8 millimeter up front. So now we have our two bolts removed. We're going to take our pressure hose and pull it out of the power steering pump. Again, you're going to want to be ready. We have a pad here we're going to put down. We're going to put our pressure hose into that pad. You're going to want to be ready for fluid to come out. Okay, so it's out now. We'll go ahead and put it right in there. And we'll let that fluid collect. What we're also going to do is take a couple more pads and just back this up. So there is fluid in our power steering line because there is fluid in our reservoir. You can see that the level keeps rising, so we have a rag here to stop that from spilling onto the rest of our pulleys and or serpentine belt. Now what we're going to do is clamp off our power steering line. So we're going to remove this power steering line by removing this hose clamp. But before we pull that line off of the power steering pump, because there will be fluid from here to here, there will also be fluid in the pump, we're going to put down a rag, or in our case an absorption pad, collect any of that fluid. Now, these hoses may have been on there for a while. We're just going to use the needle nose to spin and break that seal. Actually, see if we can just slide this hose off with the pliers. All right, we'll just aim that right into the rag. Let that drain for a minute. Once we have that drained from here to here, we'll go ahead and take this line and fold it back out of our way. Okay. I'm just going to take that line and just put it underneath our AC line, up in our headlight area while we work on the power steering pump. Our new pump is going to reuse our old pulley, which means we have to remove this pulley. We're going to take advantage of the fact that our pump is still mounted to the vehicle, almost using it as a vise. So we're going to take a long pry bar. We're going to come down at this angle here through the pulley. All right, so we're going to basically brace the pulley right up to the motor mount area. And we're going to use a 19mm socket and break that bolt free. Once you have your bolt free, take your pry bar out. You should be able to just hold your pulley and back that nut off. All right, there's your nut. And now with that same pry bar, just go ahead and pop your pulley right off of that stud. And now we can continue on to remove our power steering pump. So now our power steering pump is held in with 2 bolts. We have one here, which is a 12mm, and underneath where our pulley mounted to, it's going to be one more. It's going to be also a 12mm. We'll go ahead and take those out now. All right, we've got that one pretty loose. We'll go ahead and start on the other one. Okay, so they're both fairly loose. What we can do now is actually move over to a electric tool, speed up the process. So now we have 2 bolts holding in our power steering pump. One's going to be almost directly underneath this shaft here, and one's going to be in the back. They're both going to be 12mm. We'll go ahead and take those out now. Okay, so the reason I didn't take the top one out all the way was to kind of hold it in place. The bottom one I took out all the way. And now we can take the top one out the rest of the way. Now when removing your pump, you can see we have some fluid here, potentially have some fluid left over in here. I'm going to take it out and be careful not to drop any of that fluid on your belt or serpentine system. We're going to take our power steering pump pulley. There are grooves inside the pulley. There are also grooves here on the splined end. We're just going to lower it down, let it find its place, make sure it's all the way on. Take our nut and snug that up. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. You can tighten this down outside of the vehicle. You can use some kind of leverage here to stop the wheel from spinning, or you can do that in the vehicle the same way we took it off. So we're just going to make sure this is nice and tight so it doesn't fall off while we're working. We're going to go ahead and put it in the vehicle. We're going to take our new power steering pump, and what we're going to do is lower it down onto the tensioner. We're going to leave it right about here. We're going to take our power steering reservoir feed line that we clamped off, and we're going to reattach that because the power steering pump new has some fluid in it. And if we don't block this line, it's going to start leaking. We don't want that. So we'll take this line, put it into place. And you're going to want to make sure you get it all the way up here. Now go ahead and press that line on. Sometimes you need a pair of pliers to help. And we're not trying to crush this, we're just trying to get a grip on the hose and help us spin and push upwards. Now we have our bottom hose lined up. We can take those needle nose that we were going to use, move our hose clamp into place. Now we don't have any leaks on the bottom leaking into our serpentine belt system, which is ideal. We can now start to mount our power steering pump. We'll start with the back bolt. And then our front bolt is underneath. Now, sometimes you can get to it just straight underneath here. Because we only put this pulley on hand tight, let's make it really easy for ourselves. Just take that pulley right off. Just put that bolt in. And we'll snug that bolt up. We'll come back and we'll torque those down, and then we'll put the top line on and our pulley. So now we're going to torque our power steering pump bolts down to 16 foot-pounds. Now again, some people do this with the pulley on. You can access this with the pulley on. It's just way easier this way. So now that our power steering pump is mounted and torqued down, let's go ahead and finish the top line here. This is going to be your pressure hose. We're going to take that hose, make sure that the O-ring is clean and the surface of this is clean. I'm going to press this down into position. And we're going to put our bolt in place. We're going to have an 8mm bolt in the front. And our 10mm bolt in the back. Now these are going to get torqued down to 8 foot-pounds, or basically tight enough that you can do by hand. So here's the 8mm. We're just going to tighten that, snug it, tighten it, give it an extra little quarter turn. And that's good. The same thing with the 10mm. Get it snugged up, tighten it, a little quarter turn. So now we're going to take our power steering pump pulley, slide that back on here, make sure that those grooves align. It's seated all the way in. I'm going to take our nut and thread it on tight by hand. And then we're going to take a pry bar of sorts and lock this pulley from spinning. And we'll go ahead and tighten this down. Okay. Hey, power steering pump. So we've got upward tension on our belt, and for the most part, it's in the grooves and on the pulleys that it needs to be on. It's a little bit shifted over because now we have to get it onto our power steering pump. But you can see our tensioner's in the way, so we're going to have to move our tensioner, or also known as put tension on our tensioner, to relieve pressure on our belt. Hold on. A little bit easier done on this side. So you're going to have to take your belt and get it between the pulley and this tool here, so that way when the tool's backwards, you can put your belt where it needs to go. So get it on top of this bolt. Get your tool backwards. Get your hands in front of this. Now we have the tensioner loose. We can now put our belt onto the power steering pump. And release tension from the tool and put tension onto the belt. Give it a couple of rotations. Make sure everything looks good. At this point, you might want to go back down underneath. Make sure it looks good on all the other pulleys in the system. If everything looks good, move on. You want to come over here and check your power steering reservoir. You'll see you have two lines. You have an upper and a lower. In our case, our reservoir is completely empty. So what we're going to do is pop the cap, and we're going to fill between those two lines. What we've done is replace our power steering pump as well as drain our pressure line, so we know that from here, once we get into the vehicle, start and run our vehicle, we're going to move our steering from lock to lock, full turns all the way, both left and right, cycle the power steering fluid through the lines and through the pump. This level should drop down to where we need it to be. If once all that's done, we come back out here and we're below the lower line, we'll add it back up to between these two lines. Once you've done that, you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.